Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers. And I'm about to do the dumbest thing I do every single week. What's new and exciting in your world this weekend?
A couple of episodes ago, we talked about how labor markets might evolve to where we would have, I described it as humaniform robots. Robots not run by artificial intelligence, but run by actual human beings who are connected remotely. You think that through, and that starts to make sense. In fact, I argued at the time that technology already exists for us to do this. And what happens, but one of our listeners directs me to an article about the Avatar Robot Cafe, a cafe in Japan in which they do exactly this. They have robot wait staff that is run by, they call them pilots. These are people, human beings, who are connected remotely. They control the robots. And the Avatar Robot Cafe employs people with physical conditions that would prevent them from working.
But I'm a little worried here, Ant. Aren't we going to see something like surge pricing on the coffee because nobody wants to control the robot at a certain time of day?
I'm sure that kind of thing will evolve. In fact, I could imagine maybe several people purchasing a high-end robot that they would then hire out, and they'd work the thing one day, another one another day. Who knows? There's all kinds of interesting things that people will figure out to do with this. But I want to go to the other extreme of labor. We're talking about humans working robots. I want to go to animals, specifically rooks.
What the hell is a rook?
Rooks, crows, ravens, and magpies are members of the corvid family of birds, highly intelligent creatures, all of them. Scientists have shown that they can use tools, they plan for the future. In fact, there have been reports that crows not only can recognize human faces, but they'll hold grudges and pass the grudges on to their fellow crows that they'll hold for years against humans who have wronged them. These are very intelligent birds. Staff at a history-themed park in France have trained 6 rooks to pick up trash. They fly about the park picking up trash and bringing it back to trash receptacles, and of course they're rewarded with food.
I'm ambivalent about crows, truth be told. Occasionally I see them and I think, wow, it's nice to see them. Other times I look at them and I say, I wish they would go away. Now that I know they're grudge-holding creatures.
They are. Treat them well.
I don't know. I come from a long line of grudge holders, and I don't like creatures that do this.
Here's the interesting thing. They've been trained to do this work. And this is work that you would hire a human to do. In fact, that's what parks do. They hire people to go around and pick up the trash. Now you've got birds doing it at, I don't know what the numbers would be, but I'm sure it's something like 1/1000th of the cost of the human being. And what do you say to a bird that's taking your job?
We do what we can here in Arizona to attract birds like this because they are the natural enemy of the desert rats that every house in this entire area has to deal with.
Sure.
So the more of these birds of prey I can have show up, the less I have to pay the pest guy. So I guess there is a tangible version of costing someone his livelihood, right? The way they do pest control here is it's all categorized, and rats are a category unto themselves.
Do you have termites out there? Because that's the way it is here.
Yes.
Termites are a category unto themselves.
The real estate agents all say exactly the same thing. There are only 2 kinds of houses here. The kind with termites and the kind about to have termites.
Right.
The pest guy comes and tells us how far away from the house they are.
Wow.
They're behind our back wall, territory I have ceded to the wild. Anything that happens behind that wall is none of my business. I wander around on the web, and I ended up at a website called Unheard, H-E-R-D, for those of you who don't feel like clicking the link in the show notes. I read a thing by a guy named Tom Chivers, who is the science editor in his second book, How to Read Numbers. He wrote this article, How Long Can Humans Survive? The subtitle, The Time of Plenty Won't Last Forever.
The thought the time of plenty won't last forever has been echoed through the centuries. Every person who's ever said it has been wrong.
Let's just say that it's not supported by any evidence ever.
Right.
People who make these kinds of arguments always say the same exact thing. This time it's different.
Yes, exactly.
And then they never say why it's different. He starts with a story and he says occasionally a whale carcass washes up. The various species peck at it and eat it, and it's a time of great plenty. and then the whale runs out, and then everybody has to starve. The parallel argument is that we're living in a time of plenty right now. We're all fat, stupid, and happy, but we won't be for much longer because reasons.
Ignoring the existence of human ingenuity, the thing that gave us the time of plenty to begin with.
And we have had a time of plenty for quite some time. And actually, if you take a step back and take a look at human development, there's a number of proxies we can use to really get into that. We get better off every year as a species.
Yep.
Broadly speaking, every group of us around the planet gets a little better every year. This is not limited to the developed West. It's also other places.
And if there's any question about this, ask yourself, what are your major complaints?
That's right.
If you list out your major complaints in life, they will be things that people 100 years ago would have given anything to have had simply those complaints.
That's exactly right. And I got to tell you, I'm kind of agitated today. I'm agitated today because the plumbing dude is at my house pointing out every single thing that needs to be fixed. To do the easy, quick version, it's going to cost me $2,000. To do the longer-looking version of that, it's going to cost me another $7,000. So what's my big problem here today, Ant? I have hot and cold running water coming into my house.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. That's a miracle.
You talk about this and it's costing X thousands of dollars. While I was waiting for you because you were dealing with your plumber, I was trolling around on YouTube and ran across a video of a guy who has a candy shop. His thing was that he uses, to the extent that he can, the actual tools that were used 100, 150 years ago. And he points to this pair of scissors that he's using to cut the candy in its molten form. And he says, this pair of scissors belonged to my great-grandfather, who was a confectioner. Pair of scissors, James. It's just a pair of scissors. He's got it all fixed up. It's 150-year-old scissors, and he uses them. He says, it cost my grandfather 2 weeks' wages to buy that pair of scissors.
Wow. I think about things in those terms every now and again, not as a rule, right? You go through life and you just see things and you deal with them and you don't think a lot about them. But today, when I've got to think about paying a plumber, I'm left with the absolute miracle of water coming into my house. And it's clean and I can drink it and I can make ice out of it. I mean,
and all of that in the middle of a desert.
We are thumbing our nose at Mother Nature out here.
Right.
I mean, we should all be dead by Tuesday if the world were a rational place. When people tell me repeatedly that we're about to run out of everything and we'll all die horrible deaths, or maybe they back up a step and say, okay, we're going to run out of important things and we're going to have to live crappier lives, I always ask the same thing. Where's the evidence? Mm-hmm. Show me one time where that ever happened. World Wars I and II might negate this observation to some degree, but I'm pretty sure that decade by decade, since the beginning of recorded history, we've always been better off.
And it's funny you talk about World War I and II, because I think you're right. In every decade, we're better off, with the exception of the decades in which our governments go crazy.
I think this argument is very tired. I've seen it probably in 50 different forms, and it's never been correct.
And people have been posing this argument literally for centuries. Very smart people have been saying exactly this thing.
And of course, this brings us to the foolishness of the week. This week, I'm stepping out a little bit. It's not a person. It's not a government. It's not a country. It's an idea. And let me read the headline to you from the Washington Post. Our obsession with morning routines dates back to Benjamin Franklin. If you have one, you will achieve more than all those lagabouts who sleep in every day. And given that I slept today until 11:45, probably not Ben Franklin kind of hours, clearly they're talking about me here. Clearly they're saying, if you live the way James does, you will accomplish nothing. Which I think is probably the argument my mother-in-law once used. I'll leave it at that because she listens. But Rosalind, I remember. And I wonder why people even think this way. This is kind of like the argument between introverts and extroverts, right? That one is better than the other.
I suppose it depends on the individual. You said morning routine, and I was initially thinking this is stupid until I stopped to think about my own behavior. If I've got somewhere I need to be in the morning, I'll, for example, lay out all of my clothes the night before, knowing full well that when I wake up in the morning, if the only thing I have to tell myself is get in the shower, things will work. But if I have to tell myself, okay, you're going to have to get showered, you're going to have to pick what you're going to wear, you're going to have to do this and that, I'm going to say, heck with it, I'm going back to bed. And nothing happens.
Yeah, I just have never understood this line of reasoning. And this article elevates it beyond all belief. So we're going to hear about Henry David Thoreau and his morning, which is entirely different from mine. Benjamin Franklin, who shows up in the title. John Quincy Adams. Georgia O'Keeffe, the painter. Apparently all these weird people. Toni Morrison, the author. God, I just can't imagine living this way.
I have to tell people what it's like to deal with Morning James.
Yeah, you should actually. They would never believe me if I said it. They will believe you.
There are a few times, and one of them is actually caught on video. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's a talk that James and I gave at FeeCon some years ago. This was a morning thing, and I think to make matters worse, James had just flown in late the night before.
That's right. I had like 2 hours worth of sleep.
Yeah, 2 hours worth of sleep for a 9 o'clock session. We're getting the thing ready and, the PowerPoint set up and the chairs and all of that. And James is nowhere. And we get down to 2 minutes before and James walks in with the morning face. James' morning face is, imagine if you removed his face and replaced it with a drawing done by a 6-year-old of James' face. And that's kind of what it is, right? It doesn't move. It's just there. It's distorted in various ways. And he's got his can of diet, whatever it is that you drink all the time. And I just started laughing because I knew what was coming, right? This is supposed to be a discussion of James and I sitting on the stage talking about this, whatever. So I just grabbed James, I pointed him to the chair and gave him a little push. He went and sat in the chair and I had my index card and just started talking and looked at James once in a while, said a few words and James would nod. And it took about maybe 15, 20 minutes and he got revved up. And he started saying words. So I can stand down now. James is online.
The wife experienced this just last week. I wandered out of bed and sat down in the den, for the first minute of my day. And she said, well, I was talking to you and I was getting gibberish answers. And she said, and then I asked you an academic question about V.O. Key. For the political scientists out there, you'll all know the name. Literally nobody else will. And she said, and you gave such a beautiful 10-minute synopsis of his entire career and his thought that I would have thought you were awake. But as soon as I was done talking about that, I went right back to the gibberish. When Ant and I go to high schools, occasionally we got to be there for 8 a.m., which means we're up 5 hours before my comfort level. It makes me sick to be up this early. I don't understand people who like this sort of thing. Not only do I not understand them, I don't like the running commentary because I'm pretty sure I've accomplished quite a bit in the last 10 years or so.
You have. You just accomplished them in different hours than the rest of us.
Yeah, that's right. And everybody who writes articles like this can just me.
To get more Ant and James, buy a copy of our excellent book, Cooperation and Coercion. You can find the paper and electronic versions on Amazon and the audio version on Audible. This episode was your idea. James contacted me and said he wants to do an episode on how everybody's getting angry.
No, I wanted to do an episode on anger.
I didn't see a lot of people getting angry.
Everybody's angry with you everywhere you go.
I'm oblivious to that.
God, if I weren't bald, I would have already lost all my hair right this second. People are really pissed off. I think it does us well to wonder why that might be.
In preparation for this, I looked up to see if Pew had anything to say in its numerous polls about people being angry. And I don't like to bring everything back to politics, but there was something interesting here. Back in the 1990s, if you asked Democrats or Republicans, how annoyed are you? And Pew used some different word than annoyed, but I'll say annoyed. How annoyed are you with people of the opposite party? 16% said very. That's Democrats to Republicans and Republicans to Democrats. Today, that number's 52%. Again, in both directions.
Ouch.
Yeah.
How about that? You're looking at roughly from the Obama years to yesterday. Is that about right?
Well, I think it was 1990, so even earlier than that.
Back to the Clinton years. I remember when Obama became president, many people on the right were really, really angry. I didn't understand the anger.
Right.
Because there's disappointment in politics. But somehow with Obama, it just opened the floodgates. And you wonder, is there a racial component? Is this just part of a larger trend? And I think it did turn out to be part of a larger trend, right? Because it only got worse. And it doesn't seem to matter that all the other people have been white since that happened.
And this may be an observation bias I just wasn't paying attention before. But the first one I observed like that was George W., that I heard people on the opposite side being vitriolic, that they absolutely hate this guy.
Yeah.
I don't recall that for Bush the first, and certainly not for Reagan. He took the country by storm.
The reality of Reagan is far different than the complaints against Reagan. When he was president, he was widely adored.
Widely adored. And I think so too Nixon in the other direction. By the time the end came, there were some adherents holding on who loved him, but by and large, he was hated.
But there was no anger over that. I mean, there's a little bit here, a little bit there. But everybody kind of knew that Nixon needed to resign. And that was that. And then you find Carter, you find Ford. It's really not big problems here socially. Maybe you can get to Lyndon Johnson and start talking about Vietnam. And I think there was plenty of anger then, but it was so clearly the result of one thing. If that war hadn't happened, those people wouldn't have been angry like that. But how did we get here? You ask yourself, when's the first thing you saw of over-the-top anger? There was a woman who was filmed on a corner in D.C. as Trump was being sworn in. I think everybody knows exactly who I'm talking about. She just sat there and screamed.
Right.
It was very clearly an emotional thing for her. I think that was a bit of a sea change when I saw that. I thought, okay, things are a little different right now. But as is always the case, if you're seeing it out in the open, it happened a long time ago.
That's right.
You're seeing right now the net result of what has already happened. And I don't even know what it was. Because you go back and what do you see? You see politicians not doing their jobs, not particularly well anyway. And you see people being angry about it in garden variety sorts of ways. But the anger that we've got right now is so profoundly different. I have seen people scream and yell on airplanes, just up and swinging their arms around. There was a woman the other day punched an old man because he didn't have his mask on because, as he explained, he was drinking something. Finding a way back from all this, that's one thing. But we got to understand it first, and I'm not sure I do.
It seems that our sense of ourselves as a body politic has changed. When I was in school, grade school, high school, you're taught, as you are, about our political system and government and Congress and all of this business. And it was always presented as we Americans come together and we debate this thing back and forth, and we elect somebody who is our president. And that somehow stopped. That hasn't been the case for a couple of decades now. It's now fighting the other people for control.
Perhaps the biggest manifestation of political anger that we've had thus far was the January 6th nonsense of roughly 1 year ago.
Yeah.
What those people thought was appropriate behavior. There was a day not very long ago that if you even talked about doing that, you'd get punched in the mouth. And now all of a sudden that's acceptable. But wait, there's more. There are at least two factions within the January 6th movement fighting tooth and nail against each other.
Against each other.
Even they can't agree on anything.
What are they arguing over?
Oh, who cares? They're all wrong by definition. The fact that they are, though, I think is incredibly telling. When you look at what used to be regular life, and now everything is politicized, and there's no doubt as to why that happened, when the government declares itself to be all-powerful, and the people say, okay, sure, give me stuff, well, you shouldn't be surprised that people get kind of upset at the least bit of a thing. Politics just much more pervasive in the lives of all of us than it was ever designed to be the case. We all want what we want, and we hate people who want something different because that means we don't get what we want. And before you know it, nobody can talk to each other.
I was thinking about this topic recently. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing a number of cases that are flashpoints for left versus right. And of course, the Supreme Court is majority conservative at the moment. And I got this chill thinking, oh my God, what happens if we get to a place where you cast your vote to an end of getting your guy on the Supreme Court? however that happens, by electing the right president who's going to appoint him or whatever it is. But in the back of your mind, the Constitution doesn't matter anymore. What we're really doing is appointing 9 people on a super Congress who are going to legislate from the bench.
The Supreme Court has been described this way for years. The Supreme Court is a roving constitutional convention.
Yeah, that sounds right, James. That sounds
It's
exactly right.
And most of the time, they take a look at the text and they come down in the ballpark of the text somehow or another. But at other points, not so much. They're already into Roe versus Wade, and it's only been a year past the Trump appointments.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that people's behavior will be quite terrible.
I'm sure it will be. And I think it's going to be terrible because the Supreme Court isn't, or if it is, it's not making it very clear, coming up with some rationale for why it's saying what it's saying. Or maybe people aren't interested in the rationale. All they want is their preferred outcome.
This isn't going to yield good results.
I don't want to come across as a conspiracy theorist here, but I can't help but think that the end game here is that you've got 2 groups of people who just have to go their separate ways. As in a divorce, you just realize we don't get along anymore.
Maybe. And the weird thing here is that had we just had some amount of fidelity to the Constitution, none of this would have happened. How did we get here? Well, the Supreme Court fills up the Commerce Clause and says, yeah, go nuts, just declare anything you want as part of that. The Supremacy Clause, all the things the Anti-Federalists warned us against in the 18th century. All right, so we got a big, gigantic, expensive, powerful government that can do damn near anything, except the problem is the people can't get behind it one way or the other. Everybody wants their own things.
Right.
The answer to this problem is the exact same answer to the problem we got back in the 18th century. The correct answer here is federalism.
Yeah, let the states decide.
Let them decide. And is that going to be perfect? Well, no, it's not. But will it offer you the right to leave? The right to exit. And yes, it does actually do that. You can say, I don't like living in Massachusetts anymore. These people are crazy. I think I'm going to go to Texas. The liberals in Texas can think to themselves, yeah, I don't really feel at home here. Maybe I'll try California. And you start to see that if the states are not just subdivision of the federal government, the way that the federal government gets its plans nailed down, if states actually matter and we have a vibrant version of federalism, I think we can get away from this kind of angry. I just typed into a Google search, anger in America. I want to read you the headlines. These are just the headlines. Political rage, America survived a decade of anger in the 18th century. So we're going to compare ourselves to that. American democracy is in peril, Juan Williams. Workers across the U.S. are rising up. Can they turn their anger into a movement? The enemies of American democracy, big lie, big anger, and big money. 2021 saw plenty of violence, but no mass terrorist attacks in the United States. That's apparently the standard that we're using now. There was all kinds of violence, but none that were terrorist. New York Times, probably the best headline of all of them. A nation on hold wants to speak with a manager.
Right.
That's about right. And it goes on and on and on. There's probably thousands of headlines here.
I would imagine that people on the left and the right could agree with the idea of federalism. They say, look,
They could.
a better solution to us splitting the country apart is to let the states make decisions on their own. If that seems such a reasonable solution, why aren't we moving in that direction?
Because the people who have political power prefer to retain that power.
I see.
Even if they lose on the national level, they know they can win again next time.
Mm-hmm.
The power is always the problem. Who understood this? Everybody in the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Literally every single one of them understood this. They came up with an answer that would keep us from heading down this rabbit hole, and we were too stupid to pay attention.
That's why they wrote a constitution that limited the federal government. It didn't limit the states.
No, you could have all kinds of lunacy at the state level.
Yeah.
All kinds of things that you wouldn't even conceive of being appropriate could in fact happen in the states. Take this as the easy example. Do you suspect that there might be a state religion in Utah? Because I'm saying probably.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everybody I knew in Utah was a Mormon. Is that not allowed under the Constitution? No, that's perfectly allowed under the Constitution. As a state matter, it's irrelevant to the Constitution.
it was irrelevant in the original Constitution. But isn't there an amendment that applied the Bill of Rights to the states?
Yeah, theoretically, you got the 14th Amendment, but the people who framed the 14th Amendment didn't think that was what they were doing.
I see.
Well, it's one of the post-Civil War amendments. You got to go back to the 19th century to unpack that one. Even if you can apply the First Amendment to the states on the matter of religion, what does it say? Congress shall make no law, ... respecting the establishment of religion. What people think that means is that there can be no state religion. What it actually means is that on the state level, Congress has no right to regulate in any way whether there is or is not a state religion, because it says respecting the establishment. Respecting is a word that cuts in both directions, and most people only see it the one way. So when you start asking yourself some hard questions about what life would be like if we had paid serious attention to the Constitution and left most things in the hands of the states, boy, it starts to become a big, long list about everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Everything that makes us crazy against each other wouldn't if we had lived under the Constitution we were given.
It wouldn't make us crazy against each other any more than we're crazy against the French or the English or the Spanish. They're different cultures, they're different governments, they have different rules, and that's exactly the way it would be here.
You're right now near Pittsburgh, right, where you're in the middle of coal mining territory, and that business kind of went belly up, and you've got all kinds of other things now like insurance and healthcare. I live in the desert 90 miles from the Mexican border. My town is 40% Mexican. Mm-hmm. We live in different cultures.
Yes.
I think that's fantastic because I get to get all the best parts of everybody else's culture and they the best parts of mine. People, as they deal with each other as human beings in a marketplace, they're not that angry with each other. They are a little bit, right? When prices go up like right now, they get a little miffed, but it's never that personal anger. The only personal anger you see in terms of free markets and capitalism is the political class dragging Jeff Bezos out to shoot him in the public square. That's where the anger is.
And notice how we deal with anger in the marketplace. You walk away.
Yeah, go somewhere else.
I'm not going to that restaurant again. I'm not spending my money in that store again. You walk away.
That's right. The meanest thing I did last week was to leave negative feedback on eBay.
Right.
That was the meanest thing I did because most of our lives are lived this way. Mm-hmm. It's in a market broadly construed, wherever people come together to do the things that people like to do. Every time I look at that, it's fine. Every time I look at our political problems, I see people threatening to kill each other.
So I got to ask you to think forward 100 years. It took us about 100 years to get from what the founders designed to where we are now. Where are we 100 years from now?
The answer I'll give you to this question, given what you asked, is probably a cop-out. But I can come back and give you the other answer if you don't like this one. I think what happens next for us is going to be determined by our economics, the bad decisions we've been making for a very long time. I think there's no chance there is a United States of America in 100 years that looks anything like what it looks like now. I bet we don't even call it that anymore. I think that's what's going to happen.
And understand, the United States of America we have today is nothing like the one we had 100 years ago.
Not even close. And people have this bias. They look at their political situation and they just assume that it will always and forever be this way. If that's true, you'll have to explain to me why the United States Constitution is the oldest written constitution in the world. We are one of the youngest countries in the world. We have the oldest written constitution. What that should tell you is that regimes come and go. This one's no different. This country will fall apart the same way all the others have. What emerges after that will look kind of like what we've got now, but there will be key differences, I think, in our case, mostly geographical. Different places in the country are going to take different paths, which is perfectly sensible. People in New England, their issues are not the same as mine in Arizona. Not even close. The sooner we admit to that and move on, we're probably better off. But I think that we do spin outward to the point that we can no longer maintain what we've got.
I've often thought that what's going on economically is the catalyst that's going to push the non-sustainability to the fore.
Well, here's the problem, right? Politicians lie. And then they have to deal with math. So
Right.
you can only lie about math for so long.
Yeah, eventually the numbers catch up to you.
That's right.
And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. This is the inflation. The inflation we're experiencing now, that they're talking about price controls to control it. This is all of those decisions coming back to haunt us.
And inflation actually has gotten quite high. Pretty robust all of a sudden, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers recently. I've been afraid. Hang on, let me look.
6-ish%.
Yeah, last I looked, it was circa 6%. And
6.2, I think it was last time I looked.
yeah. I can't get numbers quickly enough. Yeah, 6% was what I saw. And that's what I've been predicting for some time now, that we're going to reach a point where the Federal Reserve has to monetize because the government's pretty much run out of places to borrow.
What the hell else can you do?
What will ensue will be something anywhere from, I've said, the 10 to 15% range, but going from 3% to 6% is going right in that direction.
Right. And look, some of us are old enough, and barely old enough, but I remember from, 79 to 82, end of Carter into Reagan, and terrible recession that we had back then. Under Carter, it was stagflation.
Right.
Double-digit inflation and double-digit unemployment
simultaneously, right.
Which every economist until that day
said was
impossible.
Yeah.
And yet here we were, Jimmy Carter,
Yep.
kind of like a little miracle maker. But I don't mean to blame this on him. We've said countless times that presidents are not responsible for this kind of thing.
Yep.
They just happen during their administrations. And it's starting to look like we're going right back to that. And I'm starting to look around and wondering what I can do with what little cash I've got, because it's not going to be worth all that much later. Mm-hmm. Do you really want to invest in anything under the present circumstances? I see a financial comeuppance around every corner. How did we get here where we're talking about anger?
Well, this makes you mad, right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. But what doesn't?
And we have that.
Sooner or later, my eyes are going to glow red and I'm going to flip my lid about something. But I don't see a way out of the anger that we've got, because the things that led to the anger are not the sorts of things that we can go back and fix now. And it won't get any better until the underlying reason for it has been addressed. And the only way you address that is to dismantle the welfare state that we now have. You already know that that's never going to happen. So what's required is enough time that it just breaks apart under its own weight.
Social Security, by its own metrics, is supposed to be insolvent in the next 10 to 12 years or so.
It will get fixed, but it won't be what we decided to do. It'll be what we had no choice but to do.
Yep.
And let's just call it a day on that incredibly optimistic note. And we'll be back next week where we're a little more jovial than we were this week. Until then, follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join us at Words and Numbers Backstage on Facebook, where the conversation continues. And
we don't say it often, but you can support our podcast making habits at patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
That'd be great.
And you can send us email at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. That's also great.
Let me stop you right there. Have you not noticed the crackpot emails we've been getting lately? Do they just drift right past your field of vision?
I get good emails. I think the crackpots write to you. The serious people write to me.
Here we go. Here we go. No, Aunt, that's not how it works.
Every once in a while, I shouldn't say every once in a while, I should say every time. Every time I talk about inflation, somebody writes me correcting me, saying that inflation really means an increase in the money supply. This is not the definition that economists use. You want to use that definition, that's fine. Nobody's going to know what you're talking about. But who cares? Just say increase in the money supply and move on with life.
I get the other side of that coin, because when people write to me, they correct me and they say, we don't have inflation because none of my bills have gone up.
Yeah.
It's all you, right? Whoever is out there taking a look at the monthly bills, that's what we use to determine whether there's inflation. I don't know how to get around that. I just typically delete those. It's better for my soul if I don't have to walk into that. But you can combat the anger. You out there, everyone within the sound of my voice, can combat the anger. Just be nice. Be a little nicer to people. I actually have fun being nice to angry people. You should all try it too. Maybe if you can't, stay off the Twitter. Ant, I'll catch you next week. Have a good one.
See you next week, James.